So, before I get too deep into my talk, I want to ask you all a question. Do you remember high school? Do you remember those 4 years that were kind of fraught with drama, expectations, planning, maybe trying to decide, is college for me? Do I want to just go into the workforce? Do I really just want to go home and take a nap? You remember those years? Think back in particular to your senior year. It was full of excitement, right? You were considering what was going to come next and wondering, where do I rank in this class and who all is actually going to make it? Pretty interesting questions, right? Did you know that in 2021, over 73 million students attended public schools across the United States? According to the National Center for Education Statistics, as of 2021, over 7 million of those students, 15% of all public school students, qualified for and received special education services in accordance with a federal legislation that outlines parameters for how state education agencies are to meet the needs of differently abled students up to and including post-secondary programming, known as transitions. Now, these programs in particular are not required for graduating high school seniors to attend, but schools must extend these services through age 21. Okay. Here's something in particular that I think is really interesting about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA for short. There are specific assurances that are provided to students, their families, and are required of the community surrounding. But most people don't realize how good of an idea it really is. As mentioned, my name is Dr. DeShanna Reed, and I am a former classroom special education teacher with nearly 2 decades of experience at all levels of education. I began my career in education in the preschool program for children with disabilities, or PPCD. In 2021, I decided that I was going to make a rather bold decision and step out of my role as a campus administrator at the secondary level to re-enter the classroom, and none other than post-secondary transitions. Seemed appropriate to bookend my K-12 career in that way. And there was something in particular that became abundantly clear to me in that year. I have a rather uncomfortable reality to share with all of you. As schools, we unfortunately missed the mark in terms of meeting the needs of differently abled students, particularly at the secondary level. You see, these programs are designed to help students develop post-secondary goals and achieve them so that they do have a plan, kind of like the one that you and I just discussed about our high school journey and what it would look like for us beyond the confines of school. The challenge, however, for many special education staff is doing so in a silo. Let me introduce you to one of my students. We'll call him SC. Now, SC was a beautiful, talented, and very excited individual who desperately wanted to become a graphic novelist and designer. Although legally blind and with a minor intellectual impairment, SC excitedly looked forward to one day being able to see his work alongside other great graphic novelists and designers. There was one hitch to that, though. Although his family was very encouraging and welcomed the idea of bringing him to that point, they had no idea where to even begin because no one had ever exposed them to the process. I wish that I could tell you that SC's experience is an isolated one, but it isn't. SC was just one of many transition students finding themselves at the end of their high school career unsure of where the road for them would lead. They had no access and real understanding of how to even connect with any of the resources in the community. They never saw themselves really in post-secondary education because they had no idea how to even get on the path, let alone knock on that opportunity door. So I did what I do. I did my research, and I came up with a plan. But in doing so, I also wondered if my experience was an isolated one in terms of special education teachers providing transition services to differently abled students. And that was when I devised a study. This study was comprised of case studies from several campus special education teachers and professionals, as well as some community-based resources. I wanted to determine where we were in particular missing the mark in terms of capitalizing on all that IDEA had to offer, because it sounds like a really good idea, right? So I asked them 5 questions. In asking them these 5 questions, I was able to devise a specific and very targeted way of being able to improve the way that we address post-secondary transitions. I call them the concentric circles of support. The concentric circles of support are pretty straightforward. There are 3 that surround and envelop each of our students, both differently abled and neurotypical. There's the peripheral, the medial, and the core. At each of these, there are very particular elements that are essential to capitalize on in order to truly guide students through the process of achieving post-secondary success. At the peripheral, we have connections with society and professional support. Anyway, nonetheless, in the peripheral circle, we have societal and professional support. This is where workplace exposure and experiences are most important. Now, I mentioned to you what I did inside the classroom, but what I failed to mention to you is what I now do. You see, on the outside, I am an educational consultant, author, researcher, and I also provide employment consulting to differently abled adults looking to find competitive, integrated employment in the community. Establishing connections with employers early on, much like could have been done with SC, would have provided him with employer-employee relationships and connected him with the greater community of individuals in his field of interest, graphic design. Engagement and inclusion is hugely important. You see, inclusion isn't just a noun or a feel-good idea that we can do in schools for those kids. Inclusion is a verb. It's the actionable steps that we take to bring IDEA to life. It's the connections that we make with students' families and their siblings. It's the connections that we utilize between institutions to help move forward the needle in terms of meeting the needs of not just individuals with differing abilities, but society at large. Policy advocacy is hugely important, and very few of us realize how much we truly impact the policies that ultimately impact the differently abled members of our community. So advocating on behalf of greater accessibility, equity, and inclusion in our workspaces and in all places is what also can guide us to improve post-secondary outcomes for the differently abled. Moving into the medial circle. This is where I lived. Educational institutions and communities. So in our communities, we have opportunities for connection through organizations, such as one that I'm a part of, called Siblings with a Mission. I happen to be the youngest sibling of an individual with differing abilities. My older sister, Adrienne, is with autism. She was diagnosed back in the 1960s, well before IDEA was even a concept. And back then, there were far fewer options in terms of offerings for families like ours. And so our connectedness to educational institutions and communities was hugely important. In order to do so, we must have much better teacher development opportunities, as well as connectedness to state agencies, which is also a challenge, because in the classroom, we're typically siloed. And so having the opportunity to connect with outside resources and bring those resources back into the classroom is hugely important in terms of not just meeting the needs inside those walls, but extending them beyond. Networking is key. I tell my students now, as an adjunct professor, networking is your key to every door you meet. Connecting yourself with others early on and often is crucial, not just for you, but for them. There was one famous person that once said, "If I have an idea and you have an idea, we each only have one. But if I share mine with you and you share yours with me, now we each have two." So networking is hugely important in guiding students through this process, especially differently abled students, allows them to connect early and often with those who ultimately they will meet again on the outside. And now to the core, the centermost point. This is where family support comes in. Our families are our first teachers. Whether our experiences with them are positive or not so, they do teach us a great deal about the world that we live in. They shape the lens through which we see the world. They also offer a great deal of financial support, and for differently abled students, this also means legal support in terms of guardianship, powers of attorney, and supported decision-making. Obtaining these early and often is crucial in assisting differently abled students with understanding what their options are once they do enter post-high school world. Mentorship is an also highly underutilized resource in terms of preparing differently abled students to move beyond the classroom. So establishing mentorships with individuals in the differing fields of interest would have been incredibly beneficial, especially for SC and other students very much like him. When we put these three together and we imagine that the concentric circles of support are like ripples and waves that move out from and back into the core, the centermost important piece of all of this, the formidable differently abled individual, utilizing this as a means of connection is a no-brainer and a much better idea. So, as we stand at the intersection between education and empathy, it is all of our responsibility to serve our role on each one of those concentric circles of support for post-secondary transitions and readiness. I can tell you this about SC. He did go on to a community college, and he did get his certificate and began working on his website. His graphic novel is coming soon. And so by willing to seek out information and advice from others in my position and utilize the experience that I had, I was able to help guide him to a career he never thought he'd actually have. And so I urge you to do your part. Activate your community. Consider where you lie, either on the peripheral, medial, or core of these concentric circles, and turn inclusion from a noun into a verb. As author James Clear once said, every action you take is a vote in favor of the person you wish to be. And that's the best idea.